A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry is an outstanding play that develops the themes of family and identity. You must write about this play in your first essay, and so I would like to walk you through the play and highlight some key passages. Let's start with the epigraph. This is a poem by Langston Hughes called Harlem. It's also known as A Dream Deferred. In the poem, we see the repetition of a poetic device, a figure of speech called a simile. A simile is a poetic comparison that uses the words like or as. In contrast, a metaphor is a poetic comparison that does not use the words like or as. For example, we see a metaphor of the payday in the poem Forgiving My Father. And in the poem Daddy, we see metaphors such as a statue or a Nazi officer or a vampire used to represent the father. In this poem, we see a series of similes. The poem reads, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?" And so there's the first simile, right? We're thinking about a dream deferred is similar to, it is like a raisin in the sun. Our second simile, it says, or fester like a sore and then run. So that's an image of a wound that is festering and running, a seeping or oozing wound. That's the second simile. Does it stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? So we have these four similes, right? Raisin in the sun, like a sore, like rotten meat, like a syrupy sweet. And then the fifth simile, maybe it just sags like a heavy load. So we have a series of 5 similes used to represent a dream deferred. And a dream deferred is a dream that is delayed. It's put off till later. It's something that you have passion for. Your heart desires it. But instead of getting what you desire, what you dream for, it's constantly delayed and put off until later. And what happens when that is constantly deferred? And so there's a very powerful ending to the poem. It's just a simple rhetorical question. It says, or does it explode? No longer using a simile there. It just says, or does it explode? Okay. Now, why is this poem included as an epigraph to the poem? Well, it should be obvious at this point that the title of Hansberry's play, A Raisin in the Sun, is an allusion to this particular poem. This line, a raisin in the sun. So just the title itself, a raisin in the sun, all right, that tells us a lot about what the theme of the play might be, which is that we expect that there might be characters who have dreams. This is maybe a play about the American dream. And perhaps these people in this play have a dream, and yet this dream is deferred or delayed, and it's causing conflict or problems within the family. And if the dream is continually delayed, then it may end up with an explosion, so to speak, in a symbolic way. So the title tells us a lot about the theme of the play. All right. So we're going to look at this play as is one of the major themes is the American dream. All right. Now we look at the characters of the play, right? Now there are different productions of the play. I included on Canvas. I included a production that is you see on the page here. These are the actors in the version that I posted on Canvas. All right. So you've got these characters here listed in order of appearance. So the main family, of course, is all about the Younger family. And we have the couple, Ruth and Walter Lee Younger. Okay, they're a married couple. Walter's about 35, we learn in the play. Ruth is about 30. They have one son, and his name is Travis Younger. Now, Walter Lee Younger's sister is named Benita Younger. She's also referred to as Benny. And Benny and Walter have a mother named Lena, Mama Younger. Mama, her name is Lena Younger. Right, so that's our family. Lena Younger, her two children, Walter and Benita, Walter's wife Ruth, and then Walter and Ruth have a child, Travis. Now there are two young men who Benita is sort of dating, and their names are Joseph Osagai and George Murchison. And then we have some very minor characters, Mrs. Johnson, the nosy neighbor, and then we'll see a man, Mr. Linder, Carl Linder, and then finally Bobo and some moving men round out the list of characters. Okay, so when you read a play, it's always a good idea to look at the characters. And this is a play in 3 acts. Okay. So as it says here, the action of the play is set in Chicago's South Side, sometime between World War II and the present. Now we can tell when we read the play based on certain references in the play, based on how much things cost. We can see that this is a play that is set somewhere in the, let's say, 50s or 60s. But it just says it could be pretty much any time. If you take out some of those references to specific historical events or a certain monetary value, we could make this play set pretty much any time. But so it's sometime after World War II in the South Side of Chicago, right? And it has 3 acts. Act 1 is divided into 2 scenes. One is Friday morning, and then the following is Saturday morning. 2 scenes for Act 1. We have 3 scenes in Act 2. Look, it says it's later that same day, still Saturday. Well, it says the following morning, then it says later that same day, Friday night, a few weeks later. I'm sorry, scene 2 is a few weeks later. And then finally, scene 3 is moving day, 1 week later after that. And then Act 3 is an hour after that. All right, so it gives you a sense of the time frame that passes in the play. We get a sense of the setting. And so it's good to kind of get this stuff clear before you start reading the play, okay? Now, when we get to the play itself, you know that we have a play that usually is divided into acts and scenes, and we often have a lot of stage direction. These are notes that you get when you read the play, but you won't see these notes when you watch the play. Now, if you watch the play produced on stage or in a movie, a lot of the set and stuff you'll see for yourself, so it won't have to be described. But I want to point out that this play is, I think, as meant to be read as much as it is to be seen as a production on stage or on the screen. And I'll show you this in the first description here of their living room. But before I do that, I just want to talk about the plot. A typical drama usually has a plot that starts with an exposition. This is an introduction part of the play in which you start to learn about the characters and kind of get a sense of what's going on. Then at the end of this exposition, there's going to be some type of inciting incident, some type of action. Something happens that gets the action moving, that starts the next section of the play, which is called the rising action. So we have the exposition and some type of inciting incident, some type of crisis or action that starts the rising action. That action will rise until you reach the peak or turning point known as the climax of the play, and that would be followed by the falling action, and then there's a resolution or sort of a conclusion that is sometimes technically called the denouement. So you have, that's the general arc of the plot of a play, and that's the plot of this play itself. It does follow that traditional pattern. So here in the exposition, the introductory part of the play, notice the description of the room. It's very symbolic. This is why it's important to read the play and not just watch it. It says here that the living room, and here the living room starts to become a metaphor, kind of a symbolic representation of the family. So there's something contradictory about this apartment. The furniture and everything in it seems like the family, they have clearly had to accommodate the living of too many people for too many years, and they are tired. So everything in all the furnishings inside the apartment are worn out and tired. And we can see pretty quickly that this is obviously representing the younger family themselves. They are tired and worn out. So we have this tiny little cramped apartment, and there's been too many people living in this apartment for too many years. So it says at the bottom of the page, the furnishings of this room were actually selected with care and love and even hope, and brought to this apartment and arranged with taste and pride. All right. But it says that was a long time ago. Now we see worn places, weariness, depression. It's very depressing. It says weariness has in fact won in this room. All pretenses but living itself have long since vanished from the very atmosphere of this room. So we get an overall atmosphere of everything being worn down and worn out. Everything is weary and tired. And so the description of the apartment and the furnishings becomes sort of a metaphor for the family. We get a little bit of description here just to kind of get a sense in our mind to imagine what the setting is. It's a small apartment, so we have a little kitchen area, and next to the kitchen area is a living area, a living room. And there's only one window. There's a little window kind of in the kitchen area is the only window for this living space. Okay, so this is where they cook, and this is where they eat their food. Just kind of the one single room, a little kitchen area with a living room, with one single window. Now we notice that there are two bedrooms, and notice we're gonna look at this as symbol of the light coming through the window. It becomes very symbolic throughout the play. There's constant description of the light coming through the window. And think about what that might mean. What is the light coming through? What does the light symbolize or represent to you? There's two bedrooms. One bedroom is shared by Mama and Benita. And directly across from that is a second bedroom that is shared by Walter and Ruth. And we find out that Travis has to kind of sleep out there on the pull-out bed. He converts the bed into the couch. I'm sorry to say the couch into a bed, sleeps there, and then he has to kind of put all his stuff away every day as they push the bed back into the couch or whatever. So that's the setting, right? And so we get right then to the action of the play, right? It's early in the morning. We see that everybody's trying to get up. The last thing we find out is that this apartment does not have its own bathroom. There's outside of the apartment door, out in the hallway, there is a common bathroom that different residents, different families all share a common bathroom outside in the hall somewhere, right? So they don't even have their own private bathroom. So part of the frenzy of the morning is that they have to get up. Travis has to get to school. Walter needs to get to work. Ruth has her own work to do. And they need to kind of get to that bathroom before some other neighbor gets in there and hogs it. Right? Now, I want you to pay attention as we go through this first scene or first two scenes in Act 1, as notice there's something about Ruth. Ruth, for some reason, she's only 30 years old, but for some reason she seems exceptionally tired. And something is going on with her. So if you can look for those clues and try to figure out maybe what's going on with Ruth. And then she gets very upset with her husband. Think about what the motivation here is. Why is she so upset? And that's what we want to do here in the exposition of this play is look at each character and try to understand their motivation. What is it that they want, or what is it that they desire? That's one way to think about motivation. What is it that each character wants the most? All right. We learn here that Travis is about 10 or 11 years old. All right. And we learn about the bathroom here on the screen. Okay. Now I think this is kind of symbolic. I highlight it because I kind of read a lot into this. When Ruth is telling her husband, you need to get up from there, man. Walter Lee, it's time for you to get up. And I wanted to put more emphasis on that. That's not just about waking up and going to work. There's something about in life about going from a lower place and trying to rise up to a higher place, a greater level of success, perhaps, you know? So I'm trying to think of that as sort of like a more of a deep meaning to that expression of getting up. Walter, what is it that Ruth wants? She wants her husband to get up. All right. So this is something to think about when you're going to be writing about this play for your paper, is the identity that we see in terms of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And the theme of what does it mean to be a man is really important in this play, really focusing on Walter Lee Younger, right? Walter Jr. He struggles throughout this play with the idea of what does it mean for him to be a man. And if we think about the two things, we've talked about it before with the story Farrington in the story Counterparts. And we looked at young Eric in Uncle Rock as he searches for what is a good father figure? What does it mean to be a real man? He starts to look at Rock and realize that this man is more of a real man than what he had built up in his mind with sports figures and other people that his mother had dated. So we've seen these stories where certain characters are dealing with or struggling with the concept of manhood. And I suggested, and we saw this in the poem with Forgiving My Father also about payday, which is that often the father plays two roles here. He plays the role as a protector, using physical strength to protect the family, and as a provider, going out, doing some type of work, and supporting the family. Obviously, the men will not be able to give birth to children or nurse the children. And so you can see a kind of a setup where the man would go when women are pregnant or in a vulnerable state. Men would play a role as a protector or provider. Now, obviously, women can protect and women can provide, right? But the idea that is that a sense of manhood. The men have a sense of being a protector and a provider, and that woman in the poem, the in my the Forgiving My Father poem, we see that the father was not being a provider. He had nothing to give to his children. And yet in the poem Winter Sundays, we see a father that's going off and doing all this and sacrificing so much to provide for his family. And then we looked also at Farrington in Counterparts. Is he a provider? No, he seems to be wasting a lot of money, spending it on beer at the pub. And he's not a protector. He actually hits his own son. He's abusive. So think of those terms. So Walter Lee has an added element here of being an African American man and thinking, okay, I want to be a provider, but for a combination of reasons, you can think of racism as one factor, a lot of social and economic conditions. It could also be personal choices that the family or individuals have made themselves, but for a variety of reasons, it's difficult for Walter Lee to provide for his family in the way that he wants to. And think about that, how that affects his identity, his sense of confidence. He feels like he's not able to stand up and provide for his family. So it starts to eat away at his sense of manhood. He starts to feel powerless and he has a very negative self image. A lot of times you'll see is in this point that the father figure might just abandon the family and leave, feeling like he has no role to play here. So that's what Walter Lee is struggling with, is the sense of how do I provide and protect my family when as an African American man I'm struggling to work and to make money. All right. Now we think as we go through, we get the sense that Ruth is wanting, what does she want? She's wanting a man who will be a protector and a provider. She wants somebody to care for her and look after her interests. And she has an important reason for wanting that we'll find out later. Okay. Now, we also in this exposition, we start to get a glimpse into what's going to be the inciting action. What is the crisis, or what is the action that starts the action, the drama going? What starts that rising action? And it has something to do with a check. We learn here it says that some type of check is coming today. Everybody seems to be excited about a check that is arriving. And so we're going to see later is that this check becomes a source of conflict within the family. All right. Now Walter starts to pick up on some subtle hints that something's not quite right with Ruth. And he says, "What's the matter with you?" And Ruth says, "Ain't nothing the matter with me." Okay. And he looks down out the window and he says, "Look at all those people down there running around and racing to work." So you think of the term like the rat race. He sees all these people running around, going off to work, trying to make a living. And we're going to find out later that Walter does not want that kind of life. He doesn't want to scramble around trying to earn just enough money to survive. He wants something more out of life. And he says, "You look young this morning, baby." I'm getting a sense that there's something about Ruth, something that's going on with her. And the way that she looks different. She seems to be glowing. She seems to have for a glimpse of a kind of a youthful look that he notices in her. And he comments on this. So it's very subtle the way the playwright here has inserted these kinds of descriptions or these dialogue that gives us glimpses or clues, and we try to pick up on them. Okay, so what's going on with Ruth? Right? And here's another reference, right? Now Travis says, "Hey, the check's coming, right?" We're all excited about this check. Okay. Now we see this kind of playful moment between the mother, Ruth, and her son, Travis. And she's got a sense that she knows that her boy, as 10 or 11 years old, he's starting to grow up and he's turning from a boy into a man. And the idea here is that kind of when a boy starts to become a man, he separates a little bit from his mother. Maybe he's a mama's boy, but as he starts to become a man, he starts to become more distant or separate. It's like he doesn't want his mom to grab him and kiss him and hug him. He starts to feel a little bit embarrassed by that. And so it says here when she starts to kiss him and hug him and play around with him, it says the masculinity and gruffness start to fade at last. So so if you're going to be focusing on this on your paper for identity as it relates to gender, like gender identity, the roles, the masculine and feminine concepts. We're going to see here that Benita is struggling with the definition of what does it mean to be feminine, and Walter is struggling with what does it mean to be masculine. What do these concepts mean? So I wanted to highlight that direction. It says the masculinity and gruffness start to fade at last. Okay, very interesting. So we see how the young boy, Travis, starts to identify with his father. And what's interesting is he wants 50 cents to take to school. And so obviously 50 cents is not all that much money, but back then at the time this play was written, it's a few dollars. I'm not sure exactly what the exchange rate would be, but it's more than just what 50 cents would seem like today. And he's complaining to his dad, right? You go to your mom, you ask for something, she says no, so you think you're going to go to your dad, and maybe the dad will override the mom. And mom's kind of the boss of the family. She runs the finances. And she says, "We don't have the money. Sorry." And Walter, of course, that hurts his pride. The fact that he can't have 50 cents, that he's not able to provide for his child, that 50 cents is a big deal, kind of hurts him, his self esteem. And he says, "What did you tell boy? Why do you tell the boy things like that?" Right? So he takes out the money and he goes, "Here, son, here's your 50 cents." And he kind of stares at his wife defiantly, like, you know, like, "What are you gonna like challenge me on this one?" He tries to stand his ground. And then he tries to brag or show off. "In fact, here's another 50 cents. Take a whole dollar. Buy yourself some fruit today, or take a taxi cab to school or something." So he wants to feel like the type of father who can just throw out money, and whatever his child wants or needs, he could provide it. So he's kind of bragging and boasting a little bit like, hey, here's a whole dollar. And the son's all excited. He hugs his dad, and they face each other, it says, in mutual appreciation. And so the mom's upset because, and we're going to find out why she's upset later, but she really needs the money and doesn't want to be wasting it. And so she's not happy about that. So Walter says, how come you always try to be so pleasant? And then Ruth says, what is there to be pleasant about? Right. So then they refer to one of Walter's friends, Willie Harris. He's got these friends, Willie Harris and another friend named Bobo. And Ruth says, well, Willie Harris is a good for nothing loudmouth. She doesn't like Walter's friends. They sit around, they talk, and so obviously Travis, because he sleeps in the living room, he can't get to sleep until everybody else kind of leaves and gets quiet. So the mom's upset, of course, Travis is tired because you and your friends keep BSing all night and you won't let him sleep. And he says, you always call my friends losers, but hey, my friend Charlie Atkins, you called him a good for nothing loudmouth too. And he went into the dry cleaning business and now he's making $100,000 a year. Okay. And of course, that's a lot of money. Even now, $100,000 is nothing to slouch at, but remember this, that's a lot. That would be a lot more money today. Right. And Walter says, you tired, ain't you? Tired of everything? Me, the boy, the way we live, this beat up whole everything. So what's going on with Walter? What's coming through his dialogue, again, is a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-worth. He feels bad that he's not able to provide his wife and his child a better living. Okay. And so he comes right out and says what he wants from his wife. He wants some type of somebody to believe in him, somebody to kind of build him up and support him. He wants a support, a partner. And he says a man needs for a woman to back him up. And so he says, look, I want you to go to mama. She'll listen to you, like, right? Have some coffee, start chatting, and let her start talk about my plan, right? We find out what is the dream that Walter has. We find out that he wants to go into a partnership with Willie Harris and Bobo. They're all going to contribute a certain amount of money and they're going to open up a liquor store. So that's his dream, is to be his own boss, to be an entrepreneur, to run his own business. So he's got this big plan to go into a partnership with Willie and Bobo and to own a liquor store. And you get the sense now, starting to figure out that somehow he needs to get mama's permission. And he thinks that Ruth might be do a good job of getting in with mama and getting her to consider this proposition, this investment. He says, look, it costs $75,000 for the liquor store, but we could probably get out a loan. We could put a loan out for $30,000. That'd be $10,000 each. So we find out that this check that's coming in the mail is a check for $10,000. And Walter wants the $10,000 to use as an investment in this liquor store. And he's convinced that if they could just get this liquor store, they'll start making some big money. Ruth kind of listens to him and says, eat your eggs. They're going to be cold. And that really sends Walter off. Right. And so this is a very important scene. Mark this on the page where he says, look, man say to woman, I got me a dream. His woman say, eat your eggs. Man say, I got to take hold of this here world, baby. And a woman will say, eat your eggs and go to work. Man say, I got to change my life. I'm choking to death, baby. And his woman say, your eggs is getting cold. So he says, what he's saying is, I'm trying to pour out my heart here. I'm trying to show you my dreams. And you just kind of diss me and you just kind of blow it off and say, hey, your eggs are getting cold. I'm thinking big. I'm thinking about the future, and all you're thinking about is eggs. And you can think about that, right? Which is that Ruth is thinking about the actual present moment. She's thinking about taking care of her family in a very real and tangible way, providing food for her family, the ones that she loves. In fact, later on, when her mother-in-law, when Lena younger, starts to complain that Travis is not eating a good breakfast, Ruth gets a little bit upset and says, "Look, I'm doing the best to provide for my children. I can provide food and I can provide clothing. I mean, what am I? And I can provide love. What can I provide for my people that I love?" Travis and Walter. Walter says, "I'm 35 years old. I've been married 11 years, and I got a boy who sleeps in the living room. And all I got to give him is stories about how rich white people live." So we find out that Walter's job is he's a chauffeur. He drives a car for a rich person. And again, he feels like he cannot provide for his child. All he can provide are stories about how the rich people live that he drives the car for. And she says, "Eat your eggs, Walter," which means I don't want you to keep going on about these big dreams that you have. And he says, "Damn my eggs, damn all the eggs that ever was." And she says, "Then go to work." And he says, "See, I'm trying to talk to you about myself, and all you can say is eat them eggs and go to work." And she says, "Honey, you've never say anything new. You don't think I'm listening to you is because you talk about the same thing over and over again. You're living in a fantasy world, thinking about these dreams for the future. And I want you to just deal with the present, the reality that we're in. Go to work, make a living, take care of us." She says, "So you would rather be Mr. Arnold than be his chauffeur?" "So I'd rather be living in Buckingham Palace," right? Come back down to reality. And Walter says, "That is just what's wrong with the colored woman in this world. Don't understand about building their men up and making them feel like they somebody, like they can do something." So it's very difficult, right? It's sort of like he it's like a vicious circle, or the chicken or the egg, right? He needs her love and support in order to be successful, but it's difficult for her to give her love and support unless he's successful. So they're kind of he's kind of caught in a vicious circle that goes around and around. Okay, and now Benita comes out, right? And you see that she's a little bit she's more educated. And so another thing you might want to do, so instead of focusing on the relationship between Walter Younger and his son Travis, if you decide to write about this play, you might want to focus on the women in the play. Look at Ruth and Beneath it. Now, Ruth is the daughter-in-law, not the daughter, but I see a lot of parallels here between this play and the story Everyday Use. In a lot of sense, Ruth is like Maggie in Everyday Use. She works hard, she's older, she's close to the mother, or in this case, the mother-in-law. And Benita is a lot like Dee from Everyday Use. Dee is going younger. She goes off to college. She becomes very educated. Her vocabulary is different, the way she talks. And so there's a disconnect between Mama and Benita that reminds me of that disconnect between the mother in Everyday Use and Dee. All right. And so you can really talk about how Benita is really struggling to be a woman, and she's trying to battle against certain stereotypes about what a woman is supposed to do and how she's supposed to act. So you have a choice, right? You're not going to can't obviously write about the entire play, so you're going to try to focus on certain parts about the play. And one thing you might want to focus on is, if you're going to write about Everyday Use, is maybe think about comparing those two young women in that play, the two daughters in that story, I mean to say, with the two women in this play. Okay. We find out some things about Benita, right? What is that she wants? What is it that she wants? Well, she wants to be a doctor. She wants to go to college. She wants to become a doctor. And again, they start talking about the check. And Benita says, "Well, that money belongs to Mama." and it's for her to decide. So we find out that what has happened here is that Walter Sr., Lena Younger's husband, Walter Sr., has died, and the insurance money, his life insurance money, the check is coming. So in a sense, it's the death of the father that has brought this money to the family. And since the money is coming to the family, now Benita says it's mama's money, it's their life insurance plan, it's not ours. She can decide. And so Walter wants the money for his liquor store, but Benita wants money to go to medical school. So Benita's upset. There's some sibling rivalry here. She's saying, "What? You want me to drop dead? We just quit school?" And he has to remind her, "Look, me and Rutha," he says, "have made a lot of sacrifices for you. Look at all the stuff that Ruth and I have done to help support you." We find out that Benita is a lot younger than Walter. She's almost 15 years younger. It seems like she says at one point she's about 20, or maybe they mean she's in her 20s. But she seems to be a lot younger. And so, in a lot of ways, Walter and Ruth are supporting and raising Benita, and they feel that she's not very grateful. And what Ruth's trying to settle, kind of calm them down and keep them from fighting, but they're having a brother and sister fight here. And then Walter says finally, "Nobody in this house is ever going to understand me." See, that's a more revelation of his motivation. He wants somebody to believe in him, to understand him. Now, here's the final thing that's funny is he's time for him to go to work, and he has to come back and ask his wife for 50 cents. Remember, he was bragging about being a big spender and throwing out $1 to his son, and he gave away the 50 cents that he needed to get himself to work. So he has to come back, and she gives him the 50 cents and says, "Here, take a taxi." All right. Now, Mama comes in. This is Lena Younger. And notice this very important description of her, right? She's one of those women of a certain grace and beauty who wear it so unobtrusively that it takes a while to notice. Her dark brown face is surrounded by the total whiteness of her hair, and being a woman who has adjusted to many things in life and overcome many more, her face is full of strength. She has, we can see, wit and faith of a kind that keep her eyes lit and full of interest and expectancy. She is, in a word, a beautiful woman. So a very interesting, lovely description of the mother as a very strong and beautiful woman, and it kind of makes me think about a contrast with this description with the description of the mother in everyday use that we saw. Right. Another thing I want you to point out about the mother is that her connection to the potted plant. She goes to the window and brings a little potted plant, and she says she feels the dirt and puts it back out. And so this plant is referred to throughout the play. And at one point, the mother, Mama, says that this plant represents me. So I want you to think of that plant as a symbol. What does the plant symbolize? As it needs water and soil and fertilizer, and specifically, it needs sunlight. It's feeble plant because it's trying to get oxygen and light. But in this south central Chicago, south side of, I'm sorry, not south central, south side of Chicago, in this kind of urban environment, this little window in the apartment, the plant is having difficulty thriving, right? So again, you can think of that plant as sort of representing that theme of a dream deferred, just like a raisin in the sun. We've got this plant that's struggling to thrive and to grow in this environment. All right. And she even says, if this little old plant don't get more sun than it's been getting, it ain't never going to see spring again. So it's not getting enough sunlight. So Ruth does try to sell Mama on the liquor store idea. And Mama says, look, we ain't no business people, Ruth. We just plain working folks. And Ruth says, well, ain't nobody business people till they go into business. Walter Lee say colored people ain't never going to start getting ahead till they start gambling on some different kinds of things in the world, in investments and things. And she said, look, he needs something I can't give him anymore. He needs this chance, Lena. And she says, I suppose that, suspect that people are always going to be drinking themselves some liquor. So I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good business, but she says, I don't think it's moral. I don't want to be investing my money in liquor. I don't think it's something that's worth our time. Even if it does make money, I think in a moral sense, I don't want to do it. And then she notices again that Ruth looks so tired, she's about to fall over. Ruth says, you know what? When you get that money, don't worry about us. You shouldn't spend it on anybody. You should go to Europe, go travel around, do something nice for yourself. You've been sacrificing your whole life for your family. You deserve a holiday. Go do something. And Mama's thinking, I could never do that. Right? So she says, look, I want to put some of this money away for Benita's schooling. And that's for sure. I'm definitely doing that. But I'm also thinking that we should put, and this is the American dream here, I want to go and put some money down on a 2-story house somewhere out in the country, somewhere out of this city, somewhere with a yard that Travis can play in, right? We could use this money. We could all kind of pitch in and we could all get the heck out of this terrible environment and go out and live somewhere nice. And Ruth says, well, Lord knows we've put enough rent into this rat trap to pay for 4 houses by now. And that expression rat trap makes Mama a little upset because she realizes it's true, but she starts to think back when she and her husband, Big Walter, had first moved in. They were just married. They were gonna plan to stay there for about a year at the most, right? They were going to put away a little bit of money, save their money little bit by little bit. And when they got enough money, they were going to get out and move out into Morgan Park. They even had picked out a house, right? She says, you should know all the dreams I had about buying that house and fixing it up and making me a little garden in the back. And none of it happen. So you get the sense that that there was constant expenses, broken appliances, maybe certain things going on. Maybe he got laid off from work or different things, or maybe medical bills. So over the course of their life, they were never able to save enough money to fulfill their dreams of owning their own home. Right? And Ruth says, yes, life can be a barrel of disappointments sometimes. So she talks about Mama says that she was pregnant with a young baby named Claude and she lost the baby and that made Walter very upset. And it says maybe because he lost that baby, Claude, he had spent his whole life working himself to death to take care of his other kids, Walter and then Benita, right? It said it was like he was fighting his own war with this here world that took his baby from him. She says, God knows there was plenty thing wrong with Walter Younger, but he sure loved his children and he always wanted them to have something, to be something. That's where brother gets all these notions. So that's a very important scene to pay attention to is that where did Walter get all of these ideas of wanting to be a big person, to be a successful person, to go into business for himself and be an entrepreneur? You get the sense that he got a lot of these dreams from his father, that Walter Sr. has passed on his dreams to Walter Jr. And that happens a lot, like we learned in Two Kinds, right? A lot of times when parents cannot achieve dreams for themselves, then they have hopes and dreams for their children. They want their children to achieve the dreams that they were not able to achieve. Okay. He was a fine man, she says about Walter Sr. He just couldn't never catch up with his dreams. That's all. Okay, so that's more references to a dream deferred. Okay, then finally we get here at this opening exposition, we get another glimpse into Benita. Not only does she want to be a doctor, but we get a sense that she's always jumping from one hobby to the next, right? She wants the money now to spend money to get a guitar and to have guitar lessons. They said, well, before guitar lessons, you had joined some play acting group that you had joined. You were going to be an actor. And that didn't go anywhere. And before that, you were in a horseback riding club. We had to pay $55 for a riding habit that's not even used, just hanging there in the closet. You jump from one thing to the other. Why are you doing that? And she basically points out that she's trying to find a way to express herself. Then she mentions George Murchison, some rich man that's dating her. And beneath this, trying to say, I'm not really interested in him. And Ruth's like, I think you're crazy. You know, he's a rich person. You'd have a great life if you just go off with George Murchison. Beneath is like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to just become a wife. I want to be something different, have bigger dreams for myself. And so she says, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm not worried about who I'm going to marry yet, if I even get married. And Mama and Ruth are surprised. What, you're not even going to get married? And she said, well, I probably will get married, right? But that's not my highest priority. I want to be a doctor, and everybody here better understand that. Okay. At the end of this scene here, you see that Ruth is noticing that Mama is tending to the plant, and she says, boy, you sure love that little thing, don't you? And Mama says, well, I always wanted a garden like I used to see sometimes at the back of the houses down home. This plant is as close as I ever got to having one. So again, this plant she wants this home where she can have her own garden, and she can't have a garden. The best she can have is a little plant in the window. And as she's talking about this plant, Ruth basically just passes out and collapses on the floor. All right. And that's a lot packed into just the first scene of the first act. We learn so much about the family dynamics and how important this money is. It's important to Mama. She wants to get this house and move out of the city. Ruth, we find out in the next scene that Ruth is in fact pregnant. And so she's hoping this money will provide us some stability for her child. Walter thinks that this money is going to be an opportunity to invest into a liquor store and to start becoming a businessman and get out of this situation where he's just living paycheck to paycheck. And Benita is looking for this money as an opportunity to go to medical school and to pursue her dream. All right. The conflict here is that they can't all spend the $10,000. They have to figure out how to, in a sense, share this money. All right. Now in scene 2, again, we see another parallel. If you're going to be writing about everyday use and comparing it to this play in your paper, notice the kind of parallel between in everyday use. Dee comes home. She's changed her name to Wangero, and she's brought this. And this guy is talking about Africa and referring to African names, and this is very similar to Joseph Osagai. He's an African from Nigeria, and he even uses the nickname. He doesn't even call Benita by her name. He uses this nickname, Sayo, or however you pronounce it. And it says, and Benita is all embarrassed, right? Don't embarrass me in front of my friend here. Don't be all ignorant and talk about Tarzan and stuff. And so, but this really makes me think of the mother in everyday use. That Dee wants to come home, but she feels that her mom is sort of backward and ignorant, and she's kind of embarrassed. So she's like, please don't say anything to embarrass me in front of my boyfriend here. And then we do find out, as Ruth comes in, we find out that yes, she is in fact 2 months pregnant. Right? And when Benita says, where's he going to live? The roof? It's kind of a little joke, but it's actually gets to what Ruth is so upset about. Is she's wondering, we barely have enough. We don't even have enough room right now. Travis is living on the couch, and now I'm going to have another kid. So you understand why she's so worried. And then Ruth slips out when she's talking about the doctor. She says She says everything is going to be fine, and yet their doctor is a man. So Mama's like, what do you mean she said? Didn't you go to the doctor? And so we find out, and it becomes clear later, is that Mama figures out that she is an abortionist, that Ruth is considering having an abortion. She's so distraught and upset about the idea of having this baby that she's gone to this woman and she's put a down payment on having an abortion. And Mama picks up on this, and Ruth tries to play it off later. She said, "Oh, I just misspoke. I meant he." But she realizes that Ruth is so upset that she's thinking about ending her pregnancy. And we can see here that Ruth is just so angry and upset because she just wants to have a stable life to support her children. And I like this term that when Beneath is a little bit embarrassed by her little apartment when Asa Guy shows up. And she says, "Yeah, we've all got acute ghettoitis." I think that's a funny term, ghettoitis. We've all have a disease called acute ghettoitis. Now, as Asagai goes and talks about, he presents her with this gift of these colorful robes from Nigeria. He mentions that Benita is mutilating her hair. He says mutilating. And so this is a very important theme back in when this was written of African American women who were, in a sense, or even men also, trying to fit some standard of beauty that maybe is set by Hollywood or the dominant society or culture. Um, and so there's a sense that a black woman should not try to straighten her hair and use all kinds of weaves and different techniques. Instead, people should embrace their natural beauty. That if you are from Africa, then you should wear your hair naturally and not try to spend. And so he even uses the term mutilate by straightening and coloring and dyeing and doing all these things to your hair. The idea is that you're not showing proper appreciation of your own heritage. It's like you're trying to sell out and assimilate to the dominant American culture or the dominant European or white American culture. So you weren't born like that. You should celebrate your natural beauty. And that was a big important movement back when it was written, this Black is Beautiful movement, and a lot of African Americans trying to understand more about their African heritage and a lot of interest in names. For example, a lot of African American families received their names through slavery. And so there was a lot of sense of trying to find identity by connecting to African heritage, to changing your name, changing the way you dress, the way you fix your hair. All this was part of a type of identity. Remember, Benita is trying to find her sense of identity, and she's trying to break from her family and find some type of independent identity. And the way the form that it takes in the play is that she's developing this relationship with this African student, Asa Guy, and he's trying to convince her, persuade her to get more into touch with her African heritage. And we find out when she first met him, she went up to him and said, "Mr. Asagai, I want very much to talk with you about Africa. You see, Mr. Asagai, I am looking for my identity." All right. So if you're going to write about Benita as a character in your essay, these are passages you should really pay attention to, because he starts to give this big college lecture about assimilation, right? You're trying to assimilate and you're trying to become part of. Now, assimilation does not automatically mean that African Americans become white, for example, right? What assimilation in the melting pot idea in the United States is that every culture, everybody that comes to the United States, all of the cultures all contribute or melt together into a American type of culture. Like we see that in jazz music, for example, that jazz music was a combination of different styles, or rock and roll, or country music. So you have a lot of different types of musical influences coming together to form something that's American. But so there's a positive sense of assimilation, which is just becoming part of the culture, that your culture is blended with other cultures into something new. Now, the negative sense of assimilation is that you give up your entire culture, your entire way of life, your language, your religious beliefs, your music and ways of cuisine and different ways of doing things, and then you get rid of all that, and then you take on the dominant culture. So that could be a negative aspect of assimilation and a positive one. And so Asagi is thinking of it as a negative and saying, look, you need to stop trying to copy white American culture. You need to find your own independent, separate African identity. I love this part when mom comes in and she didn't want to embarrass her daughter, right? And so she's very sarcastic because the daughter said, "Hey, mom, don't talk about Tarzan and say a bunch of stupid stuff." And so what his mama says, she goes, "Oh, hey, I think it's so sad the way our American Negroes don't know nothing about Africa except Tarzan and all that money they pour into those churches when they ought to be helping you people over there drive out them French and Englishmen done taking away your land." And so she's saying everything that Ruth that Benita told Mama not to say. Mama says, "Oh, I think it's just so terrible that some people try to say these terrible things." And so she's just looking at her daughter, right? And she flashes a slightly superior look at her daughter upon completion of the recitation. So I just thought that was a little funny scene between the two, right? Then she says, Benita said, "Look, you keep calling me Alayo, but I don't even know what that even means." And she's what he says, it's hard to describe or translate, but it means one for whom bread or food is not enough. And she seems to be pleased with that. So his nickname for her shows that Benita is not satisfied with her life, that she's looking for something more. Right. Well, then the money shows up. We find out here on this page, um, for I would say is that I mentioned it before. I just want to point out that this is the scene where she finds out that she had gone to the abortionist, right? Right. Well, so the money is coming, and Walter yells out, "Will somebody please listen to me today?" But Mama says, "Look, there ain't going to be no investing in no liquor stores." Mama says to Walter, "Something's eating you up like a crazy man, something more than me not giving you this money. The past few years, I've been watching it happen to you. You get all nervous, acting and kind of wild in the eyes. You're very restless," he says. "It's very dangerous, son, when a man goes looking for peace outside of the home." And he says to her, "Do you know what this money means to me? Do you know what this money can do for us?" And she's like, "Look, you need to be content. You've got a job, a nice wife, and a fine boy. And she's starting to say another baby on the way. But he says, and he jumps in and says, "Look, all I do is run around like some type of servant and say, yes, sir, no, sir. That ain't no kind of job for a man to have." She's like, "Why do you keep talking so much about money?" And Walter says, "Because it's life, Mama." And she's like, "Oh, so now money's life, right? Back in my day, it was freedom that was life, right? But now the world has changed so much." And finally, she says, "Look, don't you know that your own wife is expecting a baby?" That's what she wanted to talk about. And she said, "I think Ruth is thinking about getting rid of the child." And Walter can't believe it. He doesn't believe that it's true. I mean, he believes that she's pregnant, but he doesn't believe that she would think about an abortion. And and Ruth says, "No, it is true. I'm thinking about it. I'm in a desperate situation here." And Mama says, "It's time for you, Walter, to step up and be a man. I'm waiting to hear how you be your father's son. Be the man that he was." Right? He was a man who did everything he could for the benefit of his wife and children. I'm waiting for you to step up and be a man like your father was. I'm waiting to see you stand up and look like your daddy. And instead, he takes off and leaves. And mother says, you are a disgrace to your father's memory. All right, and that's Act 1. All right, in the next video, we'll take a look at Act 2.